Renee Castillo stood outside her daughter's school, checking her phone for the third time as the pickup delay stretched past 20 minutes, when a small boy in a wrinkled, ill-fitting jacket approached her quietly. "Can you pretend you're hugging me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Just for a second." Time seemed to stand still as Renee looked down at him, utterly bewildered by the strange, urgent request from a child she'd never seen before in her life. To understand why Renee didn't hesitate, didn't demand an explanation first, you have to understand the particular instincts she'd developed over years of raising her own daughter alone. At 34, Renee had spent years learning to read the quiet, subtle signs of a child in genuine distress. The specific stillness, the careful way this boy avoided eye contact while somehow still watching her closely for a reaction. Something in his voice carried an urgency that felt far too real to interrogate first. She knelt down and wrapped her arms around him. As she held the embrace, Renee gradually became aware of movement near the school's front gate. Several photographers, cameras raised, lenses pointed directly at her and the boy in her arms. She pulled back slightly, confused, and caught the eye of a nearby parent who was staring at the boy with unmistakable recognition. "Do you know who that is?" the woman whispered, leaning in close enough that only Renee could hear. "That's Julian Voss," the woman said, "sole heir to Voss Industries. His family's conglomerate is worth $6.3 billion. Renee stared down at the boy in his rumpled, oversized jacket, the number sitting in complete, jarring contrast to the ordinary, slightly neglected appearance standing in front of her. Nothing about him looked remotely like what she'd have imagined for a child worth that kind of fortune. The same whispering parent explained further, clearly familiar with the family's well-documented security arrangements. Julian's father, Bertrand Voss, had kept his son deliberately dressed down and driven to school in an unremarkable sedan for years, a calculated security precaution against kidnapping threats that came standard with that level of family wealth. The strategy worked exactly as intended. To any stranger passing by, Julian looked like an ordinary, somewhat overlooked child, rather than the heir to a multi-billion-dollar fortune. Once the photographers had dispersed, Renee crouched back down to Julian's level. "Can I ask you something? Why did you want a hug from someone you've never met?" Julian considered the question seriously before answering, with the plain, unguarded honesty only a child manages. "The photographers only take pictures of me when I look sad," he said. "I didn't want today's picture to be a sad one." Julian continued, the words spilling out now that he'd started. "My dad's almost always traveling for business. My mom died when I was 4. The people who take care of me are nice, but it's their job to be nice. Nobody hugs me just because they want to, only because they're supposed to." Renee felt something tighten in her chest, the specific ache of a child articulating a loneliness far too advanced for his years. The deeper reason Renee recognized that particular hunger so instantly surfaced in her own memory, unbidden. Raised partly in foster care after her own mother's early death, Renee understood intimately the specific loneliness Julian was describing, one that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the absence of consistent chosen affection. She'd spent years as a child longing for exactly the kind of unscripted embrace Julian had just requested from a total stranger. "I understand exactly what you mean," she told him quietly. "More than you probably realize." The photograph of Renee hugging Julian circulated briefly online within days, prompting Bertrand Voss himself to personally track down who she was. He arrived at the school the following week, not with suspicion or corporate lawyers, but with visible, humbled concern written across his face. "I need to understand what happened," he told Renee directly. "And I need to understand why my son asked a stranger for something I apparently haven't been giving him." Bertrand admitted with visible difficulty the full weight of what Julian's request had revealed. "I've been so consumed with protecting him physically and financially," he said, "that I never fully registered how emotionally unprotected he'd become in the process. I convinced myself every decision, every precaution, every trip was entirely in his best interest. I never stopped to ask if he actually felt cared for underneath all of it." Rather than offering Renee money or a formal thank you gesture, Bertrand asked something far more specific. "Would you be willing to remain a consistent presence in Julian's life?" he asked. "Not as hired staff. He chose you himself, in that one unscripted moment, without any of us arranging it. I'd like to honor that, if you're willing." Renee, wary of the complexity involved in entering a billionaire family's private life, took real time to think the offer through carefully before responding. "I'll agree," she finally told Bertrand, "but only on specific terms. This needs to stay genuine. No performing for anyone watching, no formal title. Nothing that turns Julian's request into something transactional. I want to be someone who shows up because I want to, exactly like he asked for." Over the following months, Renee visited Julian regularly, not as staff, but as an invited guest, sharing ordinary moments that had nothing to do with his family's fortune and everything to do with simple, consistent presence. Homework help, weekend park outings, the unremarkable rhythm of someone who simply kept showing up. "You're not going anywhere, right?" Julian asked her once, still carrying some residual uncertainty from years of inconsistent presence around him. "I'm not going anywhere," Renee said. "I promise." Watching his son grow steadily more relaxed and openly affectionate under Renee's ordinary, undemanding attention, Bertrand began restructuring his own schedule, prioritizing genuine time with Julian over the constant business travel he'd previously treated as entirely non-negotiable. "I used to think providing for him was the same as being present for him," Bertrand admitted. "I'm learning those are two completely different things." A child worth $6.3 billion asked a complete stranger for something no fortune on earth could ever purchase. A simple, unscripted hug, offered because someone genuinely wanted to give it, not because it was anyone's job to provide it. Julian and Renee's story is a reminder that no amount of wealth, however vast, can substitute for the specific, irreplaceable value of someone choosing to show up for you simply because they want to. Sometimes the richest child in the room is also the loneliest, and sometimes the smallest, quietest request reveals exactly what money was never actually capable of buying in the first place.